Welcome to Dysfictional, the RPG-focused podcast where you don't need an insight check to reveal we don't know what we're doing. I'm Rainy the Random Generator.
I'm Tukey, former academic, once again a rogue.
Oh, congratulations. I'm Ginger, professional film industry victim.
Ginger, have you ever wanted to be like a snake around your own house?
I mean, my other snakes make it look like fun. Why?
Yeah, I just figured it's a cool aspect. What about you, Tukey? You ever wanted to be running around the yard, seeing what it's like to be able to climb a tree like a squirrel that you are?
No.
Yeah, that's fair. Let's talk about druids.
Perfect.
I think if I was going to be an animal in my own house, it would have to be something that my pit bull wouldn't try to murder.
I mean, that's a fair point too. Another pit bull then.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Then we could
cool.
be friends. Yeah.
Yeah, that can totally happen.
Or like, yeah, I couldn't be like a strange cat because she might try to. Hey, wait, speaking of dead cats, you're back, huh?
We don't have to speak about that anymore because I'm not dead.
Yay.
How did that happen?
I totally found a way to revive myself on my own because of how awesome my character is.
That's really impressive. I'm super happy for you that you did that with absolutely no help or tending or anything.
Or skin grafts.
Or skin grafts
Yeah.
or diamonds or anything like that.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
Yep. For the listeners, I spent like a week or several days.
With 4th degree burns.
Yeah, 4th degree burns, pretty much trapped in a bed. But now I'm good to go. A little regeneration, fixed it.
It was 48 hours max.
Yep. And it was I'm sure, lovely time to be in constant pain where the air itself is just stinging like the fire that attacked you.
Yeah, and that was before I was revived.
Yeah.
Oof. You don't want to tell us anything about your time as a dead person?
No.
I need details because reasons. I would like more information.
Yeah. Is there an afterlife?
Yeah, I mean, there could be. Only my character knows.
All right. Well, anyway, speaking of cats and, dogs and the imminent death of life, let's talk about druids.
The circle of life.
Yeah. Druids are, depending on the aspects, there are certain subclasses of druids that even value death. They look at it as a part of life. Speaking specifically, Druid of the Spores, for example. Druids are one of the most interesting classes that you could do if you can harness their wild shape enough. Because it's really cool to be able to just transform into whatever the party needs at the time. If you need a scout, hey, I'll turn into a spider and go walk through that dungeon. Or you could be a rat or all mannerisms of things. You could be a badger and burrow underneath the fortress and get a closer look. And if you're a high enough level, you could fly on out of there at the end.
You've just described many of my activities in Baldur's Gate 3.
Yeah.
There you go.
But then once I'm in there, I never know what to do because I don't have opposable thumbs.
Yeah, that's a very fair point there too, yeah.
That's a big drawback.
And druids overall are, I mean, you kind of were mentioning this, but they're pretty versatile. They got a lot of different themes within them, which I think sometimes they might get kind of pinned more in like some stereotypical themes. But like you said, they don't actually have to be like a total nature person, like pro nature person. And they're pretty well known in like the fantasy genre, even outside of D&D. Druids are definitely kind of a classic class, I guess, so to speak. And then the wild shape, like you said, can be a lot of fun, or even fun to like to not use as well. I had a character sort of like that where they were just kind of bad at it, but yeah.
I think one of the great additions that Tasha's did was giving the option of, instead of yourself transforming, you have a find familiar, because it's really odd that druids don't get find familiar, because aside from rangers, they're the next most likely class that would have a pet, and it just baffled me. But I do like that, like you said, they're not always the nature lover. And while, I mean, usually they're trying to be the nature lovers, but while the spores emphasizes the life, one of the things that is underutilized and I think is emphasized well in the wildfire druid is how fire is a cycle of the health of like a forest. And that's a good aspect for that. And you have the shepherd druid where it's more the animals of the nature. Then you have the moon and dreams and stuff that aspects the cosmos of, as you could say, nature, which is really fun to look at.
And you can take any of those too and flavor them similar, as we were talking about, like the utility of the cleric last week. You can do kind of the same thing with the druid. Like there are subclasses of druid that basically have their own version of smite and things like that as well. So like when you're looking into your utilities for the kind of build you want to make, it's not restricted to just like, okay, I can turn into an animal and that's it. Like there are other subclasses of druid that give you additional really cool, unique abilities as well.
Yeah. I mean, my first big bad of campaigning was inspired by Druid of the Spores, because I liked the idea of a druid that loved death more than life. And not that people dying, but the value of death and undeath specifically, that's a cycle of life that they don't understand, like that they think is bad and stuff. And they find the undeath beautiful and really just wanted to have a world where undead could live as well. But obviously undead being inherently evil, but they're also mindless, so they'll just attack things and stuff. It's not really a good thing, but that's kind of why it's the big bad of it, because you get the motives, but it's also like, but no, they used to be creatures, but they're husks. The consciousness doesn't exist. You're just killing people.
Right.
They even have, I mean, beyond even just flavor of the different subclasses, the subclasses themselves have quite a few different things from other classes. So again, I mentioned it was kind of a versatile class because, like Dreams is a good amount of healing. That was actually, I don't have too much experience with Druid. That was sort of the one that I think I did in a character a couple back. But yeah, you have some healing there, utility. Then you have other ones like land. Is it Circle of Land for druids that are almost sort of roguelike, or not roguelike, ranger-like. You get some additional things based on the environment, which is kind of cool. And then, what was it? Spores, you mentioned, was not entirely, but it's like pseudo Warlock-y, I guess, in a sense, with the death, undeath thing and the necrotic part of it. So yeah, I mean, there's definitely some different flavors to it.
Necromancy.
Styles. Yeah.
Druids also have one of the, I think, more fun spell lists as well. They have a really, really good crowd control list, being Spiked Growth and I think it's Plant Growth are two of the just amazing abilities that can completely dominate early game battlefield, because you create these very large areas that could either do damage, they could slow you by *4 your movement and stuff. They have a lot of cool utility aspects with their spells like that. But then also the same thing with Plant Growth, where I actually, for my druid, once we had defeated something from a farm and stuff like that, I felt bad for that. Actually, druids were involved with it. It was part of the Strahd campaign. And I was like, I personally feel responsible because those are bad druids in a sense. So I used Plant Growth to basically double their crops for a year, which as a farmer, you're probably pretty stoked about that.
Oh, yeah. I'd be stoked about that in my own garden, just my hobby garden at home.
Right? Yeah, exactly.
2 times the tomatoes, please.
And with the spellcasting too, like you were talking a little bit about the spells, I believe they're a prepared spellcaster, right?
Yes, they can change them out every day.
Yeah, so that does go back into that style of they can be kind of ready for a lot of different situations if you're actively changing them out. Or, you could, maybe that's a little more complex for you, so you kind of have a more fixed list and go with that, but they have the flexibility at least.
And they're also ritual casters, which we didn't talk about that much with the cleric, but the ability to cast certain spells without having to use a spell slot, especially things like Detect Magic is one of the obvious examples, but there are lots of other spells with rituals tagged onto them that you can use, and it's really cool to be able to have these flavor moments with ritual spells without having to
burn resources. Yeah, I think one of the more useful ones, I mean, it's a little bit of a higher level spell if you're not going in at a high level, it'll take a minute to get, but one of the more useful ritual spells is Scry.
Oh yeah, for sure. I wish I had some on off the top of my head.
Find Familiar is definitely one of them. Scry.
I mean, you got things like Beast Sense, the Purify Food and Drink, Speak with Animals. I mean, Speak with Animals is one of the bigger examples with the Druid, because you always want to be able to talk to every animal you see, because even though Druids don't have to be the stereotypical Druid, you kind of want to be the stereotypical Druid because it's so cool to be able to talk to an animal. I want to know what it's saying, thinking and saying.
Yeah, but like talking with animals is so potentially useful. I mean, I'm just thinking back to all the campaigns we've had, and like even this current one, and how much information we could have learned from animals. They know so much.
Yeah, they've seen some shit.
Okay, are you trying to are you trying to say that just because you're a cat? Because I feel like we've only seen 2 animals this whole campaign. They were both cows, and I think I killed them with synaptic static.
Hey, you guys saw elephants. You guys saw
mammoth. We've seen things.
No, we did see a mammoth. That's right.
Polar bear.
We've also never looked for him. Like, I'm sure if we took some time and we're like, hey, I can talk with animals, let me like go find a squirrel for a little bit. Sure, we probably could have. We didn't have that ability.
I don't think anyone in our party has that this time.
Yeah. And in terms of squishiness with them, though, they are a D8, so a little bit squishy. They also can't wear armor or use shields made out of metal, so that ends up limiting them a lot. You could kind of fudge, say, like a scale mail to be like dragon scales or something. And I think that's actually a really fun aspect to do eventually, is to provide them a hide or a hide version of a higher tier of armor. But otherwise, they basically get about as much as bark skin would provide, which is cool that they also get bark skin to kind of forego the armor a little bit.
The wild shapes and like improved wild shape and other transformations do kind of help with that too, if used in the right way, I suppose. Gives you a little bit extra.
Yeah, typically for combat, you're going to probably stick to a Moon Druid if you were going to be a wild shaping in combat. Early levels, it actually is viable, but later on levels, like you're not going to have the HP pool or the damage to be able to provide out. But a Moon Druid is specifically designed to be an in-combat wild shaper, and then they can get brokenly OP, like especially at high levels where you can wild shape every turn. So if you're not one shot, then you can re-wild shape and your HP is back to full every time. It's crazy how good near max level druids can be. And they can cast spells while in their wild shape form at high levels.
Yeah, I always remember there was a sort of bonus one-shot episode of Vox Machina, like early Critical Role, where they did just like a PvP of all the Vox Machina party characters. And Keyleth wiped the floor. Yeah, she just wiped the floor with the whole party by just constantly turning into like an ancient bronze dragon or whatever. It's like they could not get her HP down enough to knock out all her wild shape forms.
As a Moon Druid, I believe wild shape actually turns into a bonus action. So you can wild shape and still attack, which is just makes that even crazier. So then you can cast spells.
Like, get wrecked.
Yeah. So you could heal yourself in the form and stuff if you even wanted to or needed to, but you could cast like Sunbeam on them and then wild shape and then, you know, next turn Sunbeam them again and then just run around as like a freaking flying dragon while them doing nothing to you. It's a lot of fun with them. Plus timeless body, which makes them like they basically get a 10 times lifespan, which is really cool. I actually had a lot of fun with that because my druid was a dwarf and basically went from hundreds of years to thousands of years being alive. And it was cool because he was an advisor to a vampire who was also ageless. So you had a fun lifespan that would be thousands of years before I would not potentially be with him, so that I wouldn't have to worry about another substitute or anything until probably something else killed us, which, yeah, something else killed us before our time was up, but you know, whatever.
What's interesting though is, and you even said the timeless body, which I think is level like 17 or 18 or something, but yeah, between level, I think it's like 2 or 3, and then the timeless body, they don't actually have any new unique class features like a lot of the other ones do. Instead, they're getting sort of that improved wild shape. They're getting some of their subclass thing. Like there's some other things they're getting, but it's interesting. They don't have, when you compare them to some of the other classes, there's not like brand new, totally unique features, I guess, in between a lot of levels there.
That is a good point. If you don't use wild shape and you prefer the Find Familiar version of it, which you can use both whenever, they just use the same resource, but you're not having to pick between one or the other. Like a ranger had the optional feature, this is an additional feature. But if you're not using the wild shape, then you're losing out on a lot of potential fun because it's literally an endless thing. Like if you don't have dark vision, you can wild shape into someone who has dark vision. If you can't swim, you can turn into a fish. If you can't fly, you can turn into a raven. So you have so many possibilities that are beyond just your character. So it's a lot of fun to think about what kind of form you want to take next or have a few in your back pocket. I think I had a few that I did multiple times, or like I had a few that I would do more than others. Spider was my big one, where I would be on our rogue and I'd be a little spider on him while he's actually stealthing around, and I'd just be on his shoulder stealthing with him. And then I believe at the time, I don't think I had telepathy, but like he could talk to me and then I could relay it later or go back. But I might have had some sort of telepathy, but I don't think I did.
And then he freaks out accidentally and because there's a spider on his shoulder.
Ah, yeah, exactly. Or like someone else does, like, oh, whew, that thing almost got you
Hold
there.
still. and then they slap you, and then all of a sudden your whole body is on his shoulder. He's like,
yeah.
Just pop back out.
It gets awkward real quick.
Yeah.
I want to talk about my druid so bad, but it's spoilers. I can't talk about it. We'll talk about it later.
Well, what else are we going to talk about then, Randy?
No, shut up. But yeah, speaking of
sneak attacks.
Speaking of sneak attacks and being on the shoulder of my rogue friend, let's talk about the rogues.
They're the worst.
I have a lot to say about rogues.
I have a lot to say too, but I feel like they're going to be very different things.
So rogues surprisingly have a lot of diversity to them because their expertise allows them to be almost more efficient at a few things than everybody else. And you can have it be where a rogue acts like a bard. You could have them be like they're really good on insights and a bunch of different aspects that I think kind of go under the radar with a rogue, because even if you don't have points into wisdom, you could gain like a +4, +6, or plus whatever into a skill and be just as efficient as the druid who has proficiency in insight.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've said this before, but I definitely slept on the rogue class for a long while.
Surprisingly versatile.
It really is super flexible. I mean, the amount of skills, proficiencies you have makes it really, have a lot of options for doing whatever you want to do with it, or even pairing it with a ton of other classes because of those base sort of stats or skills. And of course, rogue just in general is another one of those classic D&D classes, which is always fun. But, I think I avoided it for a while because I always thought of that stereotypical like sneaky or like thief rogue, but you by all means do not have to play it like that. I mean, the one I'm playing currently is not really like that at all.
You're not a sneaky thief?
Only a little bit, allegedly.
Allegedly.
And like the two stereotypicals being like they have the subclasses thief and assassin, which are good in their respective rights, but the arcane trickster is such a cool idea of the rogue with the sort of tricky spells and illusions. Scout being a little more of the scout. They're usually pretty obvious. You got the swashbuckler, who's a little bit of a one-on-one style. Soul Knife has kind of like the psionic abilities and powers and stuff. You've got Phantom, which the vampire rogue of ours was the Unearthed Arcana version of it. And it was a really cool aspect of like you were dead once, so you have like memories from that dead, and that could give you certain proficiencies that you didn't pick up originally. It allowed you to use other sort of little features like Whispers from the Dead or Wails from the Grave, which is like a second sneak attack, which is really cool to be able to use. I don't really know Mastermind much or Inquisitive, but those are much more on the flavor side of the skills.
Yeah, Inquisitive is they get even more skills, almost like sort of a detective in the sense of if you're looking for like a theme for what that subclass might be. And then Mastermind was also a little bit unique, and it was somewhat more around misdirecting damage, I think, or it had some different ways to play mind games within the battle.
I believe our Owlin friend is Inquisitive, actually.
That would make sense.
Yeah, he's an Inquisitor rogue. So I think that the Arcane Trickster is really fun conceptually, but as you get into higher levels, I feel like a lot of illusory magic becomes less effective against things you're likely to come across. Maybe not in all campaign settings, but I'm thinking about like the game we're playing now. It's like, most things have true sight or see invisibility or something like at the level that we're at now. And I always want to play around more with illusion magic, but I always feel like it's probably not going to work the way I want it to. But if you were in a setting, where you're fighting, like a bunch of orcs or something, it'd probably be super fun.
I mean, at high levels, one of the cool things is the Arcane Trickster can actually like steal knowledge of how to cast a spell from another caster, which is
sick.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. That's like, I don't think it's quite the same as like counterspell, but it basically just goes, oh, hey, that was cool. I want to do that. And then you do that.
That's like enemy skill from Final Fantasy. Just be like
Right?
copied.
They also have one of the coolest mage hands because their mage hands can actually pick locks and disarm traps. So they can do it at a safe distance of 30 feet away and mage hand and pick up objects and do things that you can't do as like a wizard mage hand. So they just have so much of an interesting flavor to them. But even as a base rogue, like you have to put points into rogue to gain more sneak attack damage. So there is that, but their cunning actions make the dash, disengage, and hide ability much more useful. It's a good use of bonus actions with them. And a lot of classes don't have useful bonus actions or good ones that they could really transition to, but they can always have an option. At worst, you hide it. Disengage so you can get in and out of a fight. Aspect of the rogue that Silica always wished she was, but couldn't quite figure out how to disengage out of the fight.
She just had no reason to disengage. And you mentioned it as well, with the sneak attack. You have that naturally as the rogue, and it's so powerful for a consistent, especially in combat, like a consistent every turn thing if you can utilize it, right? And you have access to that as any of the subclasses. So there's a certain level of like base strength, I feel like, that the rogues have through sneak attack, which can be really nice. And then also they're surprisingly, not defensive isn't necessarily the right word, but evasive. Obviously they have uncanny dodge with their reaction, which can have damage.
So good.
They have evasion on dex checks.
Even better.
Yeah, and a few other things. They get higher level. I mean, they're not tanky, but they can be pretty evasive and surprisingly defensive in that regard. I think I've been actually kind of caught off guard, even in the situation where I'm not playing my rogue the way I intended to be, disengaging a lot. Instead, she's been staying in the combat more, but even then, still is able to stay in the fray through quite a lot of stuff.
Also, I think the best example of Silica being resilient was in the Mimic Tavern. Like literally you lasted, I think it was like 4 rounds or something with area effects going on and attacks against you. And you only had 1 HP for like 4 rounds before you finally went down.
That was very dodgy.
Because of all of the evasion and stuff. Yeah. And the dex saves.
Yeah. Sneak attack is the exclusive reason why rogues are able to keep up with the damage of spellcasters, while most martial characters tend to drop off towards the later part of the game. Fighters kind of can deny that, but their action surge is a big reason why. But yeah, like you said, their evasion is amazing because dex saves are over half of all spell saves, and being able to guarantee at least half damage on it, that's the equivalent of resistance. That's amazing. They also get an additional ability score improvement increase, which is really cool. Fighters being another one who I think gets even more than they do because they get one every other level. But having that additional ability score increase adds a lot of flexibility to them as well for a feat, if it's allowed, or just maxing out that dex as soon as possible and start focusing on other things. But like you said, they have a really good base class that the subclasses are just that flavor that you want from an already strong base class that, like I said last week, monks kind of lacked the strong base class for their subclasses to shine. And their subclasses is where some of them have that power that you need, but then you have to be that subclass that have that power. While a rogue, you're going to get that power, so go for the flavor.
Yeah, and again, that power can be combined really well with other things. So, the current one I'm playing, I sort of accidentally created a one punch man style offense because sneak attack combined with what I ended up pairing it's a bard, College of the Whispers. And so sneak attack combined with psychic blades on an attack,
which is just sneak attack.
Yeah, which is just a tremendous amount of damage in one hit. And then you only have to hit once in the turn. You could split it. You could split it between a couple hits, but you only have to hit one time in a round to get, 100 damage off or something like that at a high level. That ended up being a little bit of a surprising pair. Although you can do, and you mentioned the subclass before, you could technically just within Rogue go, I think it's a Soul Knife one that you mentioned, also does something similar to the Psychic Blades onto your attacks.
And psychic damage is also like, so rarely are you going to come up against anything that's resistant to it.
Yeah.
It's a really useful one to have like as your bonus damage.
Yeah, psychic and force damage that's why Eldritch Blast is so useful too, because the force damage and things like Mind Spike and stuff for cantrips, so useful because you're almost guaranteed not to have resistance. And despite them having a D8 hit die, they can be deceptively tanky, as kind of alluding with evasion and being able to disengage after doing their whole blow of attacks and stuff. One thing that I think is kind of underutilized, but is also a really cool aspect of a rogue, is they can do sneak attack on ranged weapons. So you could be that Legolas one-shot bower as well and just destroy things from afar.
Yeah, and even adding with the bonus action economy, you can steady aim that shot if you're not moving.
Yeah.
And give yourself the advantage to guarantee the sneak attack. Yeah, the bonus action economy is really good. Like you're saying, they are very flexible between, they don't just have to be melee, they can be ranged. Oh, the reliable talent as well. So that's a little bit later, but I mean, essentially whatever you're proficient in, I think the lowest you can roll is a 10 effectively. That can be big because that even on the ones that you might be doing quite often. And with rogue in general, you're going to have a lot of proficiencies. So just, it gives you a lot of good rolls for in combat, out of combat.
For whatever you have expertise in, that basically guarantees the success, which if you're lockpicking and you got that sleight of hand, like, there you go, you win.
I don't do lockpicking. That's the other rogue.
You're not that kind of rogue. But even having things like the blind sense and the advantage on wisdom save, just kind of random, I think, on them. But it's still another proficiency that they gain, almost like monks gaining proficiency in all. But wisdom is another pretty common save for spells. I don't think it's the second most, but it is up there at least. And being able to have something for both the dex and wisdom saves mean nearly every spell is going to be difficult to land on you. And that, again, just naturally makes you really tanky. You kind of end up being the spell killer or the mage killer, mage slayer. There we go. I knew I'd get there eventually.
That is such a good feat too to pair with it. I almost went for that. That paired with just the style of a rogue always just feels fun.
Yeah, that's another thing I did in my Baldur's Gate playthrough.
I mean, technically one downside, if you look at it, they're not, and you can kind of get around this with Arcane Trickster too, but overall, compared to, obviously spellcasting classes, rogues might not have that magic aspect that you could be looking for. So, I mean, that's something to keep in mind when you're creating this class or picking this class. Not that they don't have any of it. There are some options, but it's much more of a physical style class, I would say, than some of the others.
Yeah, I would say a really negative is the One Punch Man, actually, because even if you're not, Gestalt multi-class or something, you can only sneak attack one target, give or take, of course, the subclasses and stuff, but base rogue, you can only sneak attack one target. While a fighter who, let's say, can do an equivalent damage with extra attacks can split the extra attacks between targets, while rogues don't have an extra attack unless they dual wield and use their bonus action to use that offhand. So they're pretty limited on multi-target, especially swarms and stuff, and that tends to be a big weakness of them. But man, they see that boss and they definitely want to sneak up behind and hit that kidney.
Yeah, there are ways around it. I've played into the One Punch Man quite a lot, but because I paired it with Bard, again, you're definitely right. If you're just rogue, it wouldn't work the same, but because I paired it with the Bard, I have the Psychic Blades, I can still split my damage in a way, because I could put sneak attack on one attack, I could put the Psychic Blades on the bonus attack with an offhand, and then through Bard I also had access to some Tasha's Guise, which gives extra attack, which has been really helpful. But yeah, definitely base, if you were just sticking with like full rogue, you might be putting all of it into one go, so to speak, which again can be also very, very satisfying.
One thing I don't like about the more optimal way to play a rogue is that rogues typically end up using rapiers. Almost no rogue would really use a rapier. It feels like the swashbuckler or like a specific rogue archetype, but rapiers do twice as much damage as a dagger and they take the equivalent slot. The only difference is that you can throw a dagger, but twice the amount of damage. And yeah, later on points, sneak attack ends up being most of your damage, but still, if you could do a 1d4 or 1d8, you're going to do a 1d8. So most rogues typically go for a rapier. Some of them may go for a short sword because it's a 1d6 at least, and you can actually dual wield short swords, which is really cool. But it's like every rogue I've pretty much played with has a rapier by the end of it, and I feel like if a dagger did more damage, they would probably have been using a dagger.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely started with rapiers. I also was a swashbuckler though, which fit, but oddly enough, I've actually moved the other way though from what you're saying, maybe because you gave me a cool cursed dagger too, but yeah. And I have one that can come back to me with a rune in it, but I've actually moved more towards the daggers at the high level because that 1d4 versus the 1d8 doesn't matter as much when I'm hitting for 12 d8s on each hit from other things.
D6.
Or d6, yeah, 12 d6. So it can kind of depend, but yeah, I still have both. And I do see what you're saying though. A lot of times it does end up making just more sense to go with the rapier over a dagger.
All I've ever wanted is a character that could just have a sickle, and it still hasn't ever worked out. But one day I'm going to have a sickle just because I like them.
You'll find a use.
And I 100% agree with you there.
I just want it to be a sickle, Randy. Can it be a club shaped like a sickle?
I'm always cool with the reflavoring of a weapon to make it better. And I'm not as held against, like, say, I don't know, if you had some sort of insane dagger that you could do 1d8, like, but it wouldn't be able to be thrown, like I'm kind of cool with that, basically turning a rapier into a dagger somehow, the sort of aspects with that. But the sickle again is also pretty low on the damage roll, so it's like if you're a caster, that's cool. With casters, you can do kind of whatever you want as long as you got your focus, but for a martial character, you usually want the 2d6s if you're dual wield, or if you got a two-hander, or you want that 1d8 one-hander.
No, I just want something that makes me look like the Grim Reaper. That's all I want.
I mean, technically the dagger I have is curved. I've sort of been thinking of it in my head as a sickle.
You watched Supernatural. You know how much damage those Reaper scythes can do. That's what I want.
Yeah, so for a full scythe, because that's not in D&D as a base, would you say that'd be a reflavor of an axe? Probably, right?
Maybe, yeah.
Yeah, maybe a polearm of some sort, like a halberd.
I was gonna say maybe a halberd, yeah, like one of those hook end ones.
Sorry, I actually meant specifically a battle axe, but
we'll talk about.
Yeah, you're probably right. I would probably go with a halberd or a pike or something as its as a scythe.
I think you could reflavor a greatsword and just curve the giant thing. That'll count.
Something that could be classified as a pole arm. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
It's fine. It's not relevant. It's fine.
I mean, speaking of pole arms, let's talk about the warlocks and their patrons.
What?
Well, the Grim Reaper, the scythe, the fact that I don't know where I'm going with this. Let's just talk about warlocks, please.
Fine.
So warlocks are definitely interesting. They are, despite, I could be wrong, because this is take a grain of salt knowledge, but supposedly some of their aspects of their powers actually don't require a literal patron. So technically you can get away without a patron. I don't really know how, but that's potentially a thing. But warlocks usually have a patron, and they can be all manner of things. Since we talked about Critical Role, I think one of them had it where their future self was a patron of their current self, which is actually a really fun idea. You have the great old ones, you have Celestials, Archfey, Undead, Fathomless, Fiends. You got the typical biggies of the world being one of your patrons. And I think there's so much flavor you can do with warlocks and patrons, and so many aspects you could go. You could go a super good person who someone's telling you to do, like, hey, you need to do this evil thing, or else, like, I ain't gonna have your back anymore. And you're like, no, but I want the cookies that are involved in this. And so you do the thing.
Cookies. Yeah, I think a lot of the reason that most people, I mean, speaking for myself, definitely there's not any one reason to do or not do a thing, and everyone's different. But I feel like if you're choosing Warlock, it's probably because you want your story to have something to do with a patron. Whereas if you, just wanted to sort of be like a magic sugar baby, you'd just be a sorcerer. So you want that conflict in there. And like, it doesn't always have to be conflict, right? Like my current Warlock I'm playing, Domino, definitely has had conflicts of interests over the course of the campaign with her patron. But it doesn't have to be. You could play it any way you want. You could technically have you could flip it. Flipping it might be fun, where like it's an actual benevolent patron that's like a good being or good deity, and then the warlock is like kind of just prone to evil things. There's all different kinds of ways that you can play it, and also play like how the packs work, what kind of things that they get. There's so many different avenues you can take your powers. I'm currently playing Pact of the Tome. I felt like it was the most well suited for our utility needs for this particular campaign, and it's been so much fun. Like in future campaigns, I'm 100% gonna miss my book.
Yeah, so much utility.
There's just so many things for me for free. I can cast rituals, spells out of it. I have so many invocations. I have Far Scribe, I have Gift of the Protectors, which has honestly kept the party alive better than any of my healing magic has the whole campaign, which is where it basically gives the whole party Death Ward to share. Whoever goes down first gets the Death Ward, and it has probably saved several of us over the course of the campaign. So there are so many like functional utility things that just run in the background that I don't have to think about consciously doing or setting up or remembering to pack. And yeah, it's great. And then the recovery you get on the short rest with your spell slots is really key, assuming your DM gives you time for short rests, of course.
And that's the thing, too. You kind of were alluding to it a bit. The warlocks feel like they have a wider range of complexity versus some of the other magic classes.
Someone's definitely involved with them.
Right.
Some of them can be really involved, but then at the same point, Warlock could also be a very beginner-friendly magic class in a sense, because you could go very simple, focus on just like Eldritch Blast, and just enhancing that. And you can also make super complex ones, but it does feel like they have the ability to be simpler too, if you wanted it to be, but still get that fun of the magic class.
Yeah, absolutely. And they have a really good spell list, but you don't actually have so many slots. So it's a nice sort of midline between the fighter and a caster, where it's like you get to be a caster and it doesn't actually, like, you have a lot of utility as a caster with those rechargeable slots, but it's not easy, it's easier to not get like totally overwhelmed or swamped by like a prepared list or anything like that. But the spells they have to pick from are really good.
Yeah, I think as both positive and a negative is the fact they're not prepared, because you can be stuck with a bad list of spells because you may not have known better, and let's just say your DM's a jerk about it because he's playing literally by the rules. But as a prepared caster, you do have the entire access of your spell list, and that's often overwhelming. If you can get past the I need to save these, because we all have been there where you want to save that potion for the right moment and then you finish the game without ever using the potions.
Oh, yeah.
The spell slots, the packed magic spell slots can unfortunately fall into the same category, but you are less likely to be held by that because they can come back at a short rest. So you could just be like, hey, yeah, I know you only have 2, but just use them and then you can get them back pretty quickly and then use them again.
I've actually also found that it's easier to justify using the Mystic Arcanum slots, because whatever spell is in that slot, that's the only thing you can use that slot for.
Yeah.
And you get to burn it once a day, and it's like, it's there, might as well burn it. It doesn't really cost me anything. So we talk about it all the time in our group, but the MVP of, I feel like, this combat for like the whole campaign, outside of maybe, Tukey, like maybe Silica Sneak Attack and Psychic Blades, has been Crown of Stars.
Yeah.
Because
so
it's just
good.
a free Arcanum slot. It's a bonus action.
Hey, even I have that.
Yeah, once it's up, it's a bonus. It does 4d12 radiant, and you can do it 7 times, and it's not concentration, and it is just like the best bonus action spell in the game, I think.
Yeah, that spell is amazing. So my Warlock was the genie aspect, and she chose the genie because she basically had a servant that was like a lower I think it was a Dio or a genie. I don't remember which one, but she asked to speak to one of the higher ups basically and made a pact with him to basically get out of the house. Almost literally that. It was my sorority kind of character. And I only had 2 points into genie, but my God, did I use it so much. Like being able to have the genie vessel and go into the vessel, like it was her beauty shop. She had a shower in there and she could do her makeup and all this other cool things. all in a hairpin. And at one point, the whole party got captured, except for one person who ran away. But I went into my genie vessel and they just took me and put me with the rest of the junk. So then I was able to pop out. And then there was another time where someone stole my hairpin. And so I went into the hairpin and then came back out. I was like, bitch, give me my hairpin back.
That's awesome.
It was so much fun.
Wait a minute. I have a hairpin.
It's not the same, though.
Yeah, it's actually completely unrelated.
Is it not the same?
So that was a just flavor that really was cool to have. And I was mostly a sorcerer otherwise. But the aspects of a warlock were really interesting because I liked the packs and Pact of the Blade, Hexblade. We cannot talk about that, how just crazy powerful that is, especially when you pair with a paladin who uses charisma as their spells as well. So it allows them to not have to use strength. And same thing with a warlock. They can actually be a physical fighter without having to put points into strength or dexterity to attack, which is a really cool thing that you get your battle mage as a warlock. And I love battle mages.
I mean, honestly, just in general, the flexibility of a warlock is crazy because, we've been talking about subclasses. We've talked a little bit about packs. We haven't even mentioned Eldritch Invocations yet. And Eldritch Invocations give you so much more flavor, style, utility, movement, increasing your spells. And again, you can also make it simple. You could hyper focus, right? I think there's a lot of invocations around just Eldritch Blast, and you could just calmly be casting out all of your Eldritch Blasts every round that are knocking people around, doing tons of damage. Or you could go crazy and pair it with, familiar, enhancements or other spell enhancements. So it just feels like warlocks in general have a ton of different things, for lack of a better word, that they get as they level. And we mentioned a little bit with Druid early. I mentioned how they, between level 2 and 18, there's actually not a lot of new unique things, right? Warlocks are sort of like the far end of the spectrum on that, where feels like they have so many different unique things you can kind of pair together in theme. I mean, I know I played a Fathomless Warlock in a campaign. It was actually a water-based campaign. And so that Fathomless ended up just being really fun to incorporate because that kind of have a bit of a water theme. Yeah, just a lot of options with Warlock.
Yeah, it's been really funny. The invocations are great too, because when you level, you can change one out. So if you decide that you didn't want a certain one, you can swap it for something else, which is also crazy overpowered, really, if you think about it. But you get chances to switch out a lot of that stuff if you find out, at later levels that like the earlier, say, Armor of Agathis, it ain't doing it for you anymore. But as a spell sniper, this campaign, every time I get an invocation, I always look at Eldritch Spear, and it just makes me laugh because I think if I took Eldritch Spear and coupled with my spell sniper, and now I have a Metamagic Adept feat, so I could add distance spell, I feel like I could throw an Eldritch Blast like over 1,000 feet easy. If I had done that. But then you get to the point where you're like, but how far can I physically see for? Like, how do you aim something like...
You scry and then you throw.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. But it's like, it reminds me of like, like that Mark Wahlberg movie Shooter, where like they're setting up for like the 1,000-yard sniper shot. It's like, it would be like that. It's like crazy. I'm not even in the same continent as you guys. Just like, go on without me. My bolts will catch up when you get there.
Yeah, I mean, it gives this sort of aspect of them anyway, is a little bit of the unworldly powers that they can harness. And you could even argue that maybe they kind of have a little bit of heat-seeking almost, or whatever sort of flavor you want to throw there. I think they're one of the best pairs. To me, sorcerers, I think, are also very good pairs with other spellcasters, but warlocks having the pact magic, having spell slots that are long rest and spell slots that are short rest, end up working really well together. Like you said, the invocations, even just hitting, I think, second level, being able to pick 2 for whatever you're doing is really neat. I remember my Eldritch invocation was using, I think it was Silent Image, which was a 15-foot cube of a single like object or something. I use that like crazy because there was one combat where I actually silent imaged myself in a barrel. Then some people came down, they saw the rest of the group, they all started attacking, and then while I was still in the barrel, I was Eldritch blasting in it. So I was getting the bonus of like, they don't see me. So there's just a barrel just fucking blasting me. And it was great.
Yeah, I have one with shadows. Well, it was called one with shadows at a lower level. I've upgraded to like now it's actual invisibility. But yeah, I could just be invisible like whenever for free all the time.
Yeah, so I think the reason why Eldritch Invocations are a thing and so powerful is because they have so many limited spell slots. This was a way to give them at will casting and give them more spell slots, sort of by giving them these abilities and powers and other spells that they can just innately do. And it's a cool feature. Like I said, the ability to do a lot of the illusions and, like you said, the invisibility and is really neat to just have at your disposal. And you eventually gathering True Sight, which I don't think any other class can inherently get it. That's just a base class feature. Yeah, it's at a higher level. And yeah, you could cast it as a spell, but you just get it.
Well, it's Witch Sight, which is a little different, but it's functionally really, really useful. And also, I think I only have access to True Sight from my clerics list. I'm not sure if warlocks could get that or not. They maybe can, but I haven't looked specifically. But that's what I was going to say, is that the invocations give you access to spells that aren't on the warlock list. Because I don't think, like, I have Far Scribe. I'm pretty sure Sending, I don't even think is a warlock thing.
Yeah, most of their subclass features are also not on their list. So that's more options that they end up getting provided. And even if they are on the list, just being able to cast them at will versus having to waste a spell slot, on a lot of things you probably wouldn't. There are plenty of spells that you would probably use or pick up if you could either cast it as a ritual or it wouldn't expend a spell slot. That Eldritch Invocations, like, here you go. I allow that.
Yeah, totally.
I mean, overall, come on, Eldritch Blast. I know I keep mentioning this. It's just such a fun cantrip of all things that you can just keep making better through even Eldritch Invocations, and you're just pushing everybody around. It's a lot of fun.
It's a good time.
It is a very good time.
I think it's the only... No, there are other ways to do it. There's other subclasses that can do it, but I think the Eldritch Invocation that allows you to add your spell modifier to it is one of the few that a base class gets. There are ways with, I think one of the, like maybe Wildfire allows it with, like, say, Firebolt or something like that. Some of the lightning ones do it as well. But if you're a Warlock, doesn't matter subclass, boom, you could do that as well. And now you have a +4 to your Eldritch Blast. There you go.
You also, if you're a Celestial Warlock specifically, there's a ability that allows you to add a certain amount of radiant to, like, one spell per turn or something, or like one spell every couple, however often. But you could basically, like, pump up your cantrips that way too. And as a warlock, your cantrips are, like, already pretty pumped. So depending on, like, exactly what branch of warlock you are, you can add damage as well.
I think one of the only downsides to them is their packed magic, because in a long fight or in any sort of situation that you can't short rest, you do have lower spell slots than everyone else. And that can suck in the middle of combat.
You also can't upcast your lower things into your packed slots.
Yeah, but they're automatically upcast, so that's kind of cool too.
Right, but like if your packed slots were available for your whole spell list, you could use certain things more time. Like you can't use, like if I'm using my 6th level slot, I can't cast that spell again at 7th level. You know?
True. Yeah, that is a good point.
Like I only get one scatter. I only get one and that's it, and then it's over, you know?
Yeah, that is, I think, why Eldritch Blast is so powerful and why there's so many things to improve it, because they're going to be using that more than anyone else will be using Firebolt and Create Bonfire or any other cantrips, honestly.
Well, why don't we go ahead and see if we can create something that's even better than Eldritch Blast?
Nah. Okay, you talked me into it.
This is the Flash Round, where we take turns creating the bones of a character that anyone can use. If you play one, let us know who they become. All right, let's roll initiative.
I got a nat 20!
16?
I thought I did well. I got a 19.
Nat 20.
Still better than me.
Oh, so close.
Yeah, but not better than Ginger, so she gets to go first.
Alrighty, I get to pick. Let's see. What haven't we done yet?
A lot.
Everything.
In honor of my best girl, number 1 babe, Lae'zel, I'm gonna go Githyanki for the race.
Except she's a druid.
Little curveball there, huh? Well, she's going to be a spores druid.
Nice. All right, for Circle of Spores, I'm gonna say she's kind of a little on the skinny side, like maybe a little skeletal, kind of has like necrotic aura vibes, like a death, like an entropy queen. And she's got sort of eerie silver eyes like the mist in the forest and long kind of stringy black hair.
And she used to be a sailor pirate for the background, like sailed the seven seas for a little bit. It looked like she had scurvy, but it's just, the color.
Well, then for personality trait, she doesn't sit because she wants to keep her sea legs.
Okay, for ideals, the most important value to her is spreading the acceptance of death throughout the surrounding villages, the natural order of entropy and returning to the earth.
I think that ties in well with her bond, which is, realm would be a bad word, but let's say that the bond is kind of about the afterlife, like anything that involves death and stuff like that. She feels like she has a connection to it, whether it be plants or whether it be humanoids, stuff like that. It's just all of that kind of culminates.
Well, for flaw, I'm going to mix a couple of things together here. I'm going to say that if she sees water, she has the urge to go swimming because it just sort of reminds her of those times back out at sea. That one time in particular.
Okay, for her trinket, she is going to have the hook hand of a pirate who was an ex-lover that she still remembers fondly, but no one knows what happened to the rest of him.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, uh-oh.
And her name's going to be Uh-oh.
No. Her name will be Quagtrue.
Can you use that in a sentence?
Yeah, my name is Quagtrue.
Brilliant.
It's like Quagtru. Oh, sorry. Quag, not comma, hyphen, apostrophe. Okay.
Comma, hyphen, apostrophe.
No. It's Quag. I said it again.
You got this.
Do this, Randy. No, it's Quag apostrophe TRU.
Nice.
Thanks. First try.
And does she have a shorter name?
That's up for them to decide.
Yeah. Let us know what nicknames that she gets in game, guys. Hey, you made it to the end. Well, if you enjoyed this session and want to hear more, you can find us on X, formerly known as Twitter, at dysfictionalpod for our latest updates and downloads.
Original music for this podcast is provided by Joshua Silver, the artist known as Demonon, on Spotify.
And as we say goodbye for this week, just think back on all those legendary artifacts that you probably left behind in that one room you didn't check. Yeah.